Today, we interview priest, chemist, U.S. Army general, and fantasy author, Father Pat Dolan, on Spirit Inspire, starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Inspire. And now, here is your host.
Welcome back to another episode of Spirit Inspire. I am your host for today, Vincent Ricketts, and joined with me is my co-host, Chuck Obichefu.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, Chuck. And we have a very special guest with us today, Father Pat Dolan. I'll let him introduce himself because he has quite some interesting things to say and quite a varied range of experience and expertise. So, Father, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Pleasure being with you all. My background basically is I've been a priest of the Archdiocese of Louisville for a little over 46 years.
Wow.
Now, that may be longer than some of you have been around, to say the least. I told the grade school kids this morning at St. Stephen Martyr, where I'm, quote, senior associate in helping out, that I've been a priest since longer than most of their parents were around and things like that. They had fun with that because they think that anything beyond like 12 years is the same time as the dinosaurs, and I tell them I used to ride my bicycle to school, and dinosaurs, yeah, the ones with the spiked tails would give me trouble with the bike tires, but then they kind of see my smile and know that I'm doing other things. But my background's a little bit unusual because I was in the seminary for 15 years before that. Started out in high school seminary, and I was studying for a religious community, Missionary Sons of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. They did a lot of Newman Center work on Catholic colleges and stuff, and to a certain extent I was being trained for that. By the time I got closer to divinity school, they had given up all those apostolates and were only into inner-city Spanish-speaking parishes or missions in Guatemala. I already had a chemistry degree, and that would have been useless for those kind of things. So 4 years of high school seminary is what they call a postulant, which means you're on your own financially and stuff, but you're living in the community. And so we were told exactly when we got up each morning. It was an open bay barracks kind of bed situation and stuff. So, Army basic training was easy by comparison. It wasn't bad. You got used to just about anything, except that our very first year there, right after coming back from a week home at Christmas, you could almost peel the homesickness off of the walls. It was that kind of strong. And we got over it and stuff. Started out with 55 classmates. There were 11 of us that graduated from high school seminary, which was pretty good because all but one could say it was in the top 10 people of his high school graduating class.
Beat the curve.
Beat the curve and all that kind of stuff. But we had 3 of us that were National Merit Scholars. So it wasn't so bad, and things like that. Then 4 years of college seminary, again as a postulant. We were supposed to go to novitiate after high school, and they moved it because it was right after the Vatican Council, and the community wasn't exactly sure what direction they were going and didn't want to pull new people into something that they couldn't be clear about for them. So they asked us to wait to novitiate till after 2 years of college. Got to 2 years of college, they moved it to after 4 years of college. By that point, there were 3 of us in my class, and the novice master thought I was a little too pious to really get something out of a year of novitiate. So they suggested I go to graduate school, still as a postulant,
Okay. Oh, paying your own way all the way through.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Paying my own way all the way through. I worked cutting steel during the summers of in college. And
so they're making you pay your way to glory.
Well, to ordination. Glory is another story. But ordination, at least, you can agree on. So I went through 4 years. I switched while I was in 3 years in graduate school at Indiana University in Bloomington. Got a master's of organic chemistry, a PhD in synthetic non-metal inorganic chemistry. And I only had 3 or 4 explosions in the lab during almost lost my left hand. All these kind of things. It's a little risky.
Synthetic non-organic.
It's the main group elements but doing things with them like organic chemistry. We're trying to make boron nitrogen analogs of the purine and pyrimidine bases that go on DNA and RNA, so that you could introduce cancer cures into cancer cells.
Like gene therapy, like CRISPR, things like that.
It was actually making the materials that make up the genes.
Wow.
Okay, so that was the kind of thing. The difficulty is that working with those kinds of things, they're poisonous and explosive. And so I had to be very, very careful with them. That's why I only had a few explosions in the lab. Our research group was on the top floor of the chemistry building at Indiana University. And the reason was we were told that if we went, the rest of the building would stay and things like that. Because we were doing risky stuff. But it was fun. Yeah,
Wow.
It was good. You couldn't get rid of your byproducts, your leftovers, by washing them down the sink if you ever wanted to see the sink again and stuff. So we'd freeze them in little ampules that about once a month after dark, we'd take them up to the roof and throw them against this kind of concrete block wall, because then they would explode and make beautiful colors in the atmosphere and stuff, because that was the only way to get rid of them safely.
Holy smokes! Like basically handling like dynamite. Or
Well,
it
was liquid.
Yeah.
Liquids mainly and things, but they were,
Wow.
they're beautiful colors, bright iridescent greens, yellows, purples, things like that.
That's fascinating.
But you didn't really want to have them in your hand and stuff.
No.
Yeah. I had lots of explosions, but you kind of get used to them. Okay, so that one blew up, that didn't work, those kind of things. But then I went to Rome for divinity school. Right after that, I was greeted by the Dominicans. Chemist. We know how to deal with your kind. We can gather firewood for the courtyard again if you get out of hand. We know what we're doing. I explained to them that I worked with explosives and poisons, so we decided we were going to be friends. And we did. It was a very, very good place to go to school, because my perspective on a lot of things coming from a scientific background is a little different than what you might expect. And the Dominicans, who were very, very fond of St. Thomas and his approach to things, were not afraid of any challenge from something else, whereas in a lot of other places, I probably would have been considered a heretic and would have activated that firewood in the courtyard and things like that. But they kept me in the church. They really did, beautifully and well. I remember I was in a conference with the dean of the School of Philosophy and two full professors of theology, and myself in a room that's smaller than this table, standing nose to nose for over an hour discussing this thing. Finally, the dean said, well, you're definitely wrong because you're not Thomistic, but you're definitely Catholic. And that's all I needed to know. They weren't afraid of a challenge to their ideas as long as it was still Catholic. And I looked and researched in Rome, clearly coming from the Council of Trent, said my understandings of Eucharist, which is not a chemical reaction, it's something more than that and stuff, and how it works, were definitely Catholic. And it works well. So anyway, after that I was ordained and I've been in 15 different parishes in my years here, assigned to them. But the first 4 years were at St. James at Bardstown Road and Eastern Parkway and stuff like. We used to tell people, they asked, well, where is that? It's nice. You know where the White Castle is on the corner there? And everyone did. Now, your parents did. You guys are almost too young for it. But everyone knew where the White Castle was. So we tell them, go into the White Castle parking lot, get out of your car, and look up. Up? Yeah. When did they put that there? 1906.
Raise up your eyes, lift up your eyes.
It's a beautiful. Have you been inside St. James?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's kind of terracotta on the outside. It's a gorgeous place. We used to have to hang people out the windows inside there to change the light bulbs and stuff. And
wow.
The associate
that sounds OSHA compliant.
OSHA doesn't always know what goes on inside the churches, and OSHA's safer that way to a certain extent.
LOL.
But I've got all kinds of funny stories about that, but you don't have time for that. But anyway, while there, I started doing some of the studies of early archdiocesan stuff, because I was telling Vincent, I was first one to come through Rome in 14 years. So all of the other Romans were much, much older than I was. And they'd meet once a year, have a little kind of get together. And so I got to know all of the very, very older clergy, including Monsignor Kiefer from St. Columban's in the West End of Louisville and stuff. He died probably in the early 1980s. But,
So you said that you were the first Dominican to
no,
go
I was the
through?
first. I was the first seminarian from the Archdiocese of Louisville to go
go
through
through
there in
Louisville.
14
Okay.
years.
Wow.
The one before me was Father Joe Merkt. And there was another 14 years before Father Mark Hamilton was sent over there and stuff. So it's kind of a love-hate relationship with school. But it was a nice place. It was interesting. I didn't really fit in with the East Coast U.S. style of doing things because Kentuckians don't always, for some strange reason, But we did well. I mean, I constantly get teased by people that I have to buy shoes to come to school and all that kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, a classmate of mine lived in the room right next door and actually sat next to me through most of the classes is Pete Sarton, who is the now retired Archbishop of Seattle, Washington. He was a Memphis boy, and he would tease me about that, and I would reply to him in various ways. And
There's like a modern meme that I don't know if if it's outdated now. What the kids do is like look at those shoes, and then they all point
That's
at the shoes.
it was what are those?
What are those?
Look at the shoes.
Oh my gosh!
Chuck.
I said what? Look at those shoes. Oh my gosh, that's me myself.
Yeah.
I just mean myself on the podcast. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Well, most of the time we do get our shoes here in Kentucky because the ground isn't always real friendly, and stuff like that, especially out in the country. But at any rate, after 4 years at St. James, I was sent out to Lebanon and really fell in love with it.
Like
Lebanon, Kentucky.
Okay.
There's a Holy Land area. Lebanon, Springfield, and Bardstown are the original places that people came through as Catholics. It was the first settlements there. Harrodsburg in 1774.
Wow.
Before the American Revolution. Now, you might wonder, why did they come here then? And why did Catholics in particular come from Maryland? Well, there was a civil war in Maryland called Bacon's Rebellion.
Oh, yeah.
Where it was founded for Catholics, but the majority of the people in there were Protestant. And right in the early 1770s, the majority passed a law that you couldn't be Catholic. This did not go over real well with the original proprietors of the colony and stuff. So about half the Catholics said, no way. You're not going to take away our only colony and stuff like that, the only place that we came over here to escape persecution. So they fought tooth and nail. And all the Catholic churches in Maryland were destroyed in that civil war that took place, and only stopped with the American Revolution that came about. The other half of the Catholics said, we didn't come to the New World to fight about religion. We're going to go further west. And so right about that point is when Kentucky was opening. So huge numbers of Catholics came to Kentucky.
Fleeing persecution, basically.
Well, to a certain extent, they started that fleeing the Civil War kind of thing that was going on in Maryland. Pennsylvania let people be any religion they wanted, but that was the only other colony that permitted, because they were Quakers. And so they were extremely peaceful. But there were a number of Catholics that were not quite so peaceful and decided that they're not going to take it. Others decided that they'd rather fight the frontier than fight their neighbors. And that made sense. And then the next year, we had 1775 First Continental Congress, 1776, Declaration of Independence. And so people continued to move further west during that same time frame. And then at the end of it, 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed, when it was opened up, then huge numbers were granted land grants because they had fought in the Revolution. And so a lot of people poured into Kentucky, Catholics especially in this central bluegrass area. And that's why there were a huge number of Catholics here, about as many as there were in the Maryland area. There were none in Boston, zero, because it was founded as Puritans. They didn't like Catholics, So there was one parish in New York because during the 1660s, there was a restoration, and basically 1670s, you had the Duke of York became King of England, and he was Catholic, and he married a Catholic lady, and in fact, then they threw him out of England because they didn't want a Catholic king.
Is that like
it's called the
Cromwell? Is that the Cromwell stuff? Or?
It was right after Cromwell. It was the Restoration after Cromwell. It was Charles II was the one right after Cromwell, and James II was his brother, because Charles didn't have any children. Well, James had 2 daughters earlier that were raised as Protestant, and his wife had died. He got married again to a Catholic. He became Catholic, and they had a little boy that was going to be raised as Catholic and who had rights as king, because you got king versus queen, kind of thing. So the English didn't want to have they were tolerant of James II as a Catholic king, but they didn't like it. And they didn't want another one. So they threw him out. That's where you got the Old Pretender and Bonnie Prince Charlie and all those other stories because they threw out the Stuarts, which were their family name, who were originally from Scotland. And so the Scottish, who were just very recently reunited with the English, didn't like the fact that the English had thrown out their king too. And so they had rebellions about all of this and all kinds of stuff. But it was under James II that they had one parish in New York, and that was it. So what happened with us is that we had a bunch of English Catholics that came from Maryland particularly, or came through Maryland, came through the Cumberland Gap, particularly up Wilderness Road into central Kentucky. Whole bunch of them. Others came down the Ohio on flatboats and blazed a trail into the Bardstown area, but both those passageways produced a whole bunch of Catholics here in the very, very late 1700s, very, very early 1800s. So you had one diocese in 1790, Baltimore, that covered the entire United States all the way to the Mississippi River. Okay, that was it. And the Catholics in Kentucky kept begging the bishop to come over and do confirmation. Because back then, before St. Pius X, in the early 1900s, you had to be confirmed before you got First Communion. So if you had no confirmation, how did you get communion? And so they desperately wanted the bishop to come visit him. Bishop Carroll could take a ship to Europe, do a preaching tour to raise money, recruit seminarians to be priests, buy all of his equipment, and get back to Baltimore easier than he could get across the Appalachians to do his due diligence in Kentucky. So he begged Rome to make the Kentucky area, everything west of the Appalachians essentially, a separate diocese, which made sense. Mm-hmm. You'd have a bishop for the west part, you have a bishop for these. They didn't have to cross the mountains. They could take the rivers pretty easily because the rivers didn't go across the mountains. They don't go up, they only go down for some strange reason. But nevertheless.
Pesky gravity.
Yeah, gravity would do that. But nevertheless, so Bishop Carroll kept begging Rome to make the Kentucky area, Bardstown was kind of one of the bigger towns at that point, a separate diocese. And so Rome finally did. Rome doesn't act quickly. And there were some good reasons. Napoleon was coming through. He had imprisoned the Pope, and all kinds of other things. So it was very, very difficult for Rome to do much of anything. So once Rome did, they not only made Bardstown a diocese, but they had a bunch of bishops that were extra in Rome. Why? Napoleon had come through and taken over a bunch of dioceses that had land with them, because Napoleon wanted the land, particularly in Belgium, in Germany, in Switzerland, and places like that. So he had Italy. So he had taken over the diocese. And what do you do if an incoming emperor takes your whole place? You go back to your boss in Rome. So they had a surfeit of bishops. They wanted to dump some in the New World. So they did. So they made New York and Philadelphia and Boston dioceses as well as Bardstown. The first 2 bishops of New York never made it to New York. One was appointed in Rome, consecrated, or was already a bishop, and was assigned to New York. They had a British blockade, never made it to New York. He died in Rome. Second one, same thing, died in Rome. The third bishop of New York actually set foot in New York, and things like that. We were lucky. We had Benedict Joseph Flagey, who was consecrated in another location and then was able to be over here. And I think Kenrick was the first one for Philadelphia, and so they would do that. Carroll didn't want to lose Philadelphia. He'd make that there in a carriage ride. He didn't want to have it a separate diocese. But you don't argue with Rome, you know.
But like what you were saying is what you're saying is that Boston, New York, Philadelphia have dioceses because
we were the ones that Carroll asked for one. Otherwise, he would kept quiet about it. Now, around that same time, then we purchased Louisiana, and there was a diocese made in New Orleans, but it was a suffragan diocese of Cuba, because Louisiana was Spanish for 40 years. Yeah. And then Napoleon took it back, and then a couple years later he needed money, didn't have the troops to defend Louisiana, so hey, I get money or I lose troops. I'll take the money, you know. So he sold all of Louisiana, and that became the responsibility of Bishop Flagey because there was no bishop there. It was a diocese, but they didn't have a bishop. And in New Orleans.
The audience, just as a reminder, right? We don't just mean like little state of Louisiana now. We're talking about the whole Louisiana territory.
All the way out to Montana.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Now, there weren't many people that far out there, but there was St. Louis, there was Kaskaskia, Cahokia, Vincennes, Terre Haute, several French settlements, Sault Ste. Marie up in Canada, which the British never let go of, and even though they were supposed to earlier, and a number of other places, including Bishop Flagey wrote back to Rome about this new upstart village that was on the shores of Lake Michigan called Chicago. But he didn't think it would amount to much. So that was in 1836, because they tried to found it in 1810, 1811, and they got wiped out completely, the Fort Dearborn Massacre. But anyway, that's some of the original stories. We had a bunch of English Catholics that came, and surprisingly, they were, well, not too surprisingly, they and all the other non-Catholics got along very, very well in Kentucky. The reason is that first they were defending against attacks by Indians, but there weren't many in Kentucky. Why was it that the whole Bluegrass area was the only place in North America uninhabited by original natives when the Europeans came over?
Are you serious? There were no native tribes here?
There weren't any here.
It's like one of those fertile places.
It's very most fertile. Why? They tried to explain that it was in between hunting grounds and stuff. That I didn't buy that. Now, there's a story that the Welsh came through here in around the year 1000. If you go over to the New Albany Library, they've got an entire bookshelf of Prince Madoc and his Welsh group that came through.
That's the group that Thomas Jefferson
believed
came through.
Yes, and Queen Elizabeth I believed it. I mean, and there's evidence. We found skeletons with Welsh armor on them buried in Sand Island and stuff before it was flooded by the McAlpine Dam and stuff. We've got a number of other things, and I started writing the short story, and the first 3 pages are all those anomalies about the Welsh having come through here. And why is it that they didn't stay? And then why, in a sense, they eventually became, some claim, the Mandan Indian tribe in South Dakota and were wiped out in 1836 by cholera.
Because you said that some of them had blue eyes, right? Before
and blonde hair. And they spoke a Welsh dialect. There were a number of explorers that went through there in the early 1810s, 1820s.
Lewis and Clark.
Yeah, Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea, and stuff like that. And so I incorporated them into a fictional story of what it would have been like living there. There's also evidence that the Norse actually got a little further in.
Not just Newfoundland. not just Newfoundland.
Newfoundland, no, sir. Not just there. Well, there's the Kensington stone up in Minnesota.
I've
seen it.
I've heard. I don't know what it is though.
It's a stone about twice the size of these things, and it's made out of slate, and it's inscribed in runes, and it's been translated. It's a story of them coming through there, and it was kind of buried under, just stuff on the way. And there was this huge tree that people cut down, again, a couple hundred years old, that found it under their roots. And the runes people thought were just made up or something like that. And then they checked in the Norwegian Chronicles
sagas
of a expedition having been sent over here through Hudson Bay. And they came down the rivers from Lake Winnipeg and stuff like that, the Red River that flows north, and were in there. And the question is, what were they looking for? Well, my answer is they were looking for some of their lost Norse colony that was part of the stories here. Now, you don't have to believe any of that, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it and things like that. It's a good story because it's heavily Catholic. So.
Okay, so a couple. Take this wherever you want.
Sure.
But so you've been making references to these books here on the table. These are yours.
Correct.
So what are they?
Okay.
And tell us a little bit more about these.
Well, it's like a Lord of the Rings type story, but with a Catholic atmosphere.
Interesting.
Okay, Lord of the Rings is pre-Christian, and things like that. You have C.S. Lewis that has analogies to it and stuff, but these are definitely Catholic, take place in the 1300s, about a year's worth of experience. It starts out trying to explain what the society was like, and then give you an example of what it would have been like to live there. There's an assassin's guild that tries to do some bad things, and there's some young characters, basically slightly younger than you all, just kind of like 18, 19, 20, 21 kind of thing, that are trying to resist them. And they use all the characteristics. Now, they're patterned after some buddies of mine and things like that too. So there's clergy because they're dealing with diabolical forces at times, and there's magic users, which is fundamental scientists. I'm a potion maker as a chemist. Yeah. Now most of them blow up. But I can also I can understand how to make real potions. Back then, for example, they would have told you you're feeling poorly. Well, go out to a willow tree and take some leaves, put it in a cup, put some sour wine in there, kind of crush it up and stuff like that, leave it sit for a while, and then pour off the liquid carefully and drink it. You'll feel a lot better. They were making aspirin. They didn't know it. It's acetyl salicylic acid. Now, I can give you the equations for it, but I don't want to mess up your day. But it's a pretty easy reaction. It's salicylic acid comes out of the leaves of the willow tree. But anyway, that was alchemy, or that was their magic user stuff. They thought it was magic. They had no idea.
What's the quote? It's like any technology advanced enough is indistinguishable from magic or something like that. Like if the technology of the time
if you can't be explained,
right,
you presume it's magic.
Yeah.
Because you don't know why it's doing it. You think it's good. I kind of got into that because I figured, people used to do incantations over their reactions and stuff, so I started doing incantations over my chemical reactions, but they were prayers. And I realized that the number of prayers were kind of timing how long it was going. And so that was something that actually worked in the chemistry, but it seemed like the prayers had an effect on it, or their incantations, holy or unholy, depending upon who they were and stuff. But so you've got clergy, you've got magic users, you've got rangers that knew how to do things, you've got knights. They called them paladins because, and I explained that, they came from the Palatine Hill in Rome because when Constantine, who was Christian, fought against Maxentius at the Milvian Bridge outside of Rome, the Praetorian Guard, who were guarding the emperor, all started with Maxentius. And so they couldn't be trusted, so he brought in his own, gave them a different name because they lived on the Palatine Hill. So you got paladins or palatines. And you've got two parts in Germany, the Rhineland-Palatinate and the Oberpfalz, or part near the Bohemian border and stuff, that are called paladins. So I took all these.
So magic users in that series of books are like what we would refer to as alchemists, but not
rudimentary scientists.
Not fakes.
Now, I've been called an alchemist as well as a chemist. And some of the people who knew what I worked with were pretty correct in that assessment.
So you said these books are very Catholic.
Very
right?
Catholic because, again, they're magic users. They have guilds. In the back, they have a construction guild and stuff, and they all had priests with them. They all had blessings. And there's an established clergy and stuff like that.
So if who do the magic users in that book say that they draw their power from?
They draw it basically from God. Okay. Everything comes from God. The paladins draw their power from God. The clergy draw their power directly from God. And if they don't do their prayers each day, their spells don't work, and things like that. They're basically like first aid people. Yeah.
How do you think that conceptualization of fantasy and like collides with like the modern, how modern audiences view fantasy? Because we're almost trained even to think that there are powers outside of the power, right? The only power, right? And people are not quick to ascribe that type of reality altering power, perceivably to God, right? But you do it in the books. Like, is it like how are you juxtaposing?
Well, it's kind of indirect. It's a lot of what we'd call technology. But technology initially has its basis in what God has done for us. I mean, he set up the way elements react with each other to make compounds and to make what we'd call medicines, what we'd call building materials or foodstuffs and stuff. And about a third of the way through the first book, there's a major discussion of that between a couple of the characters, because one of them's trying to get through his journeyman exam as a magic user. And he's talking to his classmate who had gone through it a year or so beforehand. And what were the professors like? First of all, they have to figure out which professor is going to be on their board, and they do that at a cocktail party. And there are techniques that their director kind of helps them with and stuff like that. So they're trying to figure out how these things work. One of them is how to tune a room acoustically. And they had to do measurements and things, and they had to actually make some chimes. So he better come in with a file to clean off the corrosion on the little metal chimes to make sure it fits with the calculations that they did. So it's a lot of what we'd call physics and chemistry, a little bit of biology and stuff, but some geology and how to do things and stuff. But it ultimately goes back to the skill that God put in people to be able to use the materials and the tools that he gave them.
Yes.
And they're very, very devout in that kind of thing. Little tiny funny part is I describe devotion to the Blessed Mother there in the opposite terms, if you will. There's a female head of the Assassins Guild who absolutely hates the Blessed Mother. She's the exact opposite of what she wants to be.
She kills people for a living, I imagine.
Pardon me?
She kills people for a living.
She does, but she hates the very concept of the Blessed Mother, so she describes why she hates her. And so you can't get young people to really read about the Blessed Mother very much, but you can get them to read about an assassin's guild master and why she hates it so much. And so you begin to see, I really like why she hates, so it fits the pieces together. The second book, so this is the first one, it starts out and sets the stage and has some pretty interesting attacks there and stuff like that.
And these are set where?
These are set in the Holy Land area of our diocese.
Okay, in like the 1300s.
In the 1300s.
Pre-Columbian.
Pre-Columbian. And it explains eventually why there was no one living here when they came through.
You're filling the gap, the historical gap.
Correct.
So are the characters the Welsh people? Or are they like the natives?
The characters are the Welsh.
Okay.
Welsh and Norse. that have come through here, because some of them interfaced with it. The Norse were considered kind of barbarian-like, and they relished in that.
So by 1,000, this 1,300.
1,300 is when it takes place.
But these groups had, like, what's the history of these groups? When did they enter?
Well, the Welsh supposedly came through, landed in Mobile Bay with a fleet of 10 small ships, and then went back and made another group. So he had 20 ships worth.
Like how far back from 1,300?
Well, about the year 1000, more or less. And they slowly moved their way up here. And then after what happens in the books, and I don't want to tell you everything, eventually started moving further west.
So like, I know this is historical fiction, but like from a history standpoint, by 1000 AD roughly in Western England and Scandinavia, most peoples inhabiting those areas were fully converted into Christianity.
They were forced?
Fully converted into Christianity.
Oh, yeah, they were definitely Christian. No pagan left.
Well,
Norse there were some Druids left.
Okay, some Druids.
So there's a little bit of that flavor that seeps in, and they work with that. In fact, I don't want to give too much of it away, I'm afraid, but there's interactions with the Druids that are very good.
Okay.
Not all of them, but interaction that are very good. And it's a very interesting thing because at one point there's a group of young Druids that a whole larger group has been wiped out. And the paladins are there kind of protecting them. So they don't want the paladins to leave. So they keep asking questions about Christianity. And so that's my excuse to explain more of the Christianity. But it's the characters they're doing it for their own reasons to try and keep the paladins there. And then there are other arguments that take place, but there's a number of subtle things that go place. So, for example, the second book is mainly about what happens in the Duke City, kind of the main capital area, where there's a bishop and other things, where there's this one spell book from a very evil sorcerer that is lost. And they're afraid that it's starting to contaminate the flavor of the place. And they try and destroy it in the process. Unfortunately, in the third book, they have let in a major devil that comes in, and they have to battle it. And they find that magic doesn't work against it. Only clergy spells do, as in sacraments, Eucharist, blessings, and things like that. But the paladins also have something called a holy sword, that is kind of like a lens that focuses the holiness in the lives of the paladin that they can use in battle. And you see that from the very beginning. Now, in the fourth book, then they're dealing with a weather control spell that starts out at the beginning. You forget about it with all these things going on that has some biblical references to it and things. So they're dealing with some really very interesting things that take place in there. But all heavily Catholic in background. So, for example, they do some good things when there's been a devastation in some places by this death monster, this very powerful devil that gets in there, and they're trying to put things back in shape. And some of the families don't want to help other families, so the clergy have to convince them that it's right to do and all. So there's a whole series of not just Catholic doctrine and beliefs and sacraments, but good Catholic practice that kind of works their way into the enthusiasm of the young people reading it because they want to be like the heroes in the book. Does that make some sense to you?
It does, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's great. I mean, I was talking to somebody, this was several months ago, but they were talking about they have some very small children at home, and how practically to share the faith with their kids, and it's always through story.
Yeah.
This person has a daughter, young, she's maybe 4, and is like, oh, like I want to, she says like I want to be just like Joan of Arc because they're telling stories about Joan of Arc,
right.
And I think that's really so human, this telling through story, and
because the characters have to be realistically human or you don't identify with them.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And so there's a lot of little, a lot of skill and care that must be taken in constructing a story. Mm-hmm. I had a question, because your book series, Traces of Magic, mm-hmm. And you were telling me before the show,
sure.
About how this got kind of started because you were writing scenarios,
sure.
for Dungeons and Dragons group,
sure. Yeah.
which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
I some people, they hear the word magic and they kind of freak out a little bit, and they're like, what magic, evil, devil, bad,
right.
All of that stuff. So how do you respond to that, and kind of what do you make of that kind of attitude?
That's a really excellent question, because as you say, it bothers people in the atmosphere of things. Well, magic, as Chuck has described, actually was what we call technology that we don't understand the technology, because they didn't know how to make aspirin out of acetyl salicylic acid from the extractions from the willow tree, and sour wine, which is acetic acid, and all that kind of stuff. And again, I really don't want to mess up your life by giving you the equations for that. I'd love to, but it's not going to work.
They didn't have the scientific. They weren't utilizing the scientific method.
They were to a certain extent, and they were doing it well. Now, the other part of it is there's a difference between magic and prayer. Magic seeks to kind of control what people are doing, and we still do that. You have certain types of music. You can't help but kind of start tapping your feet to it and start moving with it. That's the closest thing we've got to actual magical control of stuff. Prayer opens up options and lets them work on that. But prayer also works in controls against evil spirits. I can tell you that as a priest. I've been called even by non-Catholics, especially out in the country. We got something going on in our trailer or whatever it is. Would you please come out and bless it? And things like that. And I've done a lot of those. I've seen some pretty ugly things at different times, and I've never let any of them get too close to me. But mm-hmm. Would bring the Eucharist with me and things like that, so they couldn't. But still, in a sense, you've got clerical magic that has an effect on demons and devils, evil spirits, that kind of thing. You've got scientific things that they thought were magical because they didn't understand, that works against, building a bridge. Whether it's an archway or whether it's construction with the right timbers and stuff like that. All these things that work together. And in between there, you've got some things that you don't quite understand, you want to push, but magic doesn't work on humans. Unlike the Aladdin cartoons and stuff like that. You can have freedom, or you can have magic that controls, but you can't have both.
There's an account in the Bible of Simon Magus,
yes,
right? Where I think it's in Acts.
Yes, it is.
They go into, I forget what the city is, and
it's Samaria.
In Samaria.
Yeah.
Samaria, right? And Simon Magus is there basically, I guess, scoffing at the power of God that, the apostles are speaking to, exhibiting. And then he challenges them to basically a magical showdown, right?
No, that's not true at all. He was a disciple of Philip the deacon and was impressed by what Philip could do by imposing hands and healing people and speaking in tongues. And he was his disciple. And when Peter came and we're going to do confirmation, he was impressed with that and offered to buy the ability to do it. That's where you get the term simony.
Yes.
Because that was what they did. They shared things and they paid for the skills, kind of like
the secret knowledge.
Well, we'd consider it today the tuition to medical school. Because you have to pay for learning the skills that you need to and stuff. And then Peter just rounds on him and says, "May your money go to perdition with you," and all that kind of stuff. But Simon replies, "Please pray for me that does not happen." Simon was not an antagonistic. He was repentant and stuff, and then the story stops. My perspective on that is if you were Peter and you had denied Christ and had been forgiven, and someone apologizes and asks for forgiveness, are you going to withhold forgiveness from him?
No.
No. I mean, yeah, Peter is not about to do that, but the story doesn't continue at that point.
So is it like Apocrypha, that the story about, them casting him down when he's like flying around?
There's nothing in Scripture about that anywhere. Yeah, there's some that claim that the whole Gnostic heresy was part of Simon Magus's group, but there's no real evidence of that. That's a story from St. Justin Martyr's time frame and stuff, which is about almost 75 years later kind of thing. So I think Simon Magus just gets bad press. I'm sorry about it. So we're gonna try and redeem him a little bit.
Okay.
So, but yeah, the big thing about magic is that you can have freedom, or you can have magic that controls you in some kind of subtle sense, like hypnotism or other kinds of things. But there are magical skills, like ventriloquism. You can kind of throw your voice and make it sound in different things. And there are other things that you can do, like we can make things levitate and stuff like that today. We use magnetism and things to do that. They didn't know that. But the big thing is that what we call technology, most often they called magic. But because they didn't understand it, everything that they didn't understand seemed a little bit too mysterious and things like
Sure.
that. And clergy were a little bit afraid of it, but not too. That gets discussed at the very end of Book 3 in great detail. So now these are all on audiobook. So if you don't want to read things, and they're all on Kindle, they're
Excellent.
And they're almost the reason I still keep them on Amazon is they're cheap. Like, $10, $11, $12, and they go by page numbers. So that one's $16 because it's a much bigger one.
Yes.
But they're cheap. I put them on other things, they'd be 2-3 times that price. Now, because the audiobooks are like $25 or something like that, but they're all out there so you can listen to them while you're driving along. It's dangerous in traffic because if you're part of a battle, you get into it, then you get road rage just from listening to the books and things like that. So we don't want that to happen.
So this is a true blue Catholic mythology for Kentucky.
True
for
blue
Kentucky.
Catholic. I call it not mythology so much as fairy tale stories grown up. Because there's a lot of truth in the very, very center of it. And then there's a little bit of elaboration, kind of like the sugar coating on the medicine that you have to take and things like that. So, but the idea is to get the knowledge of the faith into people in an enjoyable way. So
yeah,
I hope they might make it worthwhile, because I didn't start out that way. I just started with a short story to name things after friends of mine. That's what you write them for.
Well,
and it grew. But it grew in a good way. It's like I was in the area, and it's almost like the story was in the atmosphere waiting for someone to tell it.
They should have just invited you to be the dungeon master. Would have solved all the problems.
Well, it didn't. It started the problem. It started me writing stories and things. And there are about maybe about half dozen in the group, and we'd all take turns being dungeon masters and stuff. One had it in ancient Greece, and funny story is that he kind of transported us into hell, and we were trying to get out past the three-headed dog, the Cerberus.
Yeah.
Well, we invented caramels, and so the dog came up and wanted to buy us, so we threw caramels at him, and he loved the caramels. So every time we came by it, we'd sit up and beg with all three heads wanting more caramels, which is not what the dungeon master intended, but it's the funny thing that you got, you do funny things that are not part of the script.
Yeah.
And that's the things that you remember even more.
I think I've partially played a D&D. You played a D&D ever before?
I've played Pathfinder, which is close enough. But yeah.
I've never heard of Pathfinder. See, this was 50 years ago.
Close.
They've made things a lot more dark in different ways of doing it. This was a lot brighter adventure because you couldn't be an evil character and succeed. It just wouldn't work because nobody would play with you or things like that. And they wouldn't. They wouldn't. Their characters didn't like you. They'd shun away from you and stuff. But if you were a good character, you use the goodness to help make it work. And to a certain extent that did, because only really good paladins could get a holy sword, which had extra effects, particularly against evil. It was almost like a combination of that magic against evil things that we do with sacraments.
It's the word of God,
Yeah.
sharper than any blade, able to pierce bare marrow and flesh to the division of souls.
But it's a little closer to kind of ordinary day-by-day dirty reality than just reading the scripture, because it's taking things, putting them into the area around us.
Yeah.
And you'd look out at some of these places and, oh yeah, that's what it's talking about in the book and things like that. You're in the story. So
one of those things that I love about fairy tales is that they're realer than real in a lot of respects. My I have a young daughter, and I'm of course thinking about what are the stories I want her to grow up with, and I just recently, and by recently I mean a few months ago, came into a book of like the original Grimm's fairy tales with all of the.
They're pretty tough.
All of the dark elements.
Yeah,
because I was like, no, I'm not sugarcoating these. Like we're gonna
right into the cannibalism.
Yeah, we're gonna tell. I mean, hey, Hansel and Gretel, is a pretty horrifying story. If you really think about it, we tell it to kids.
These are not that bad. I promise you, they're not that bad.
Light reading.
I'm like reading these a lot of these to myself because my daughter is not even a year old, so she's not really understanding things yet. But I'm reading these to myself and I'm going, man, like these are awesome. Like just these little, and it's oral tradition.
Sure.
For so long before they were ever written down, and I also love the Lord of the Rings. I read those out loud to my wife, maybe back at the beginning of this year, and Tolkien's whole. I mean, Lord of the Rings is a fairy tale. It is and fundamentally a Christian Catholic fairy tale. I mean, Tolkien was a devout Catholic.
Devout,
it's all throughout, and talk about magic. I mean, that's all through.
Lots of magic in there.
But I loved that one point of distinction, between say magic and prayer that you made, which is the direction of intent. That
correct.
Magic in the negative sense. And like evil magic would be, I'm trying to control something, someone else. But, prayer is not, I'm trying to control, but I am trying to open myself up to the mystery of God, in my soul. And that's, and that's how Tolkien understands magic.
Right. Let his will, not thy will, be done.
And the clerical magic in here is all healing type stuff, or pushing away evil. Now, the magic user type stuff is basically technology things like making potions or tuning a room or any of the other kinds of things that go with that. And they have it. And there's one character in there that I pushed a lot of myself into, of course, because that's my background and stuff, who's a magic user and a cleric, and he gets pushed around because of both of those. So he's having to answer to his bishop about how they work together or don't work together and all that kind of stuff. And they're at kind of this reception at the Duke's place, and there are a bunch of people standing around listening to it. After a while, the people start backing up a little bit to get away from the discussion. And as you're reading it, you can feel yourself kind of backing up as well, because you're not sure what's going to happen as a result of that discussion. But it's that discussion. It's how are they related, and are they not? Because there are times they need the bishop's help to get rid of this big devil and other kinds of things that are in there. Okay. Now, you had asked about my own background. I eventually went into the military after about 9 years. Wow. The reason is I had asked, even during seminary time, to just be in the reserves or something like that. And it sometimes not only takes the Vatican a while to make a decision, it sometimes takes bishops a while to make a decision. So,
as a chaplain?
As a chaplain. I went in there. I went in as a lieutenant, ended up as a general. And so that was kind of rare. But spent a year in the reserves, then 5 years on active duty, and then the rest of about 22 years or more in the National Guard, Kentucky National Guard, and then I was the senior chaplain for the entire nation in the Army National Guard, because there's one general, and in each state there's a colonel, and then he has other chaplains and chaplain candidates and chaplain assistants and things like that. So my job was to help mentor all those full bird colonels. Most of them were not Catholic. Surprisingly, during my years in the National Guard, I was a state chaplain as a Catholic in Kentucky, only priest in the group. Tennessee had a priest that was a state chaplain. Mississippi had a state chaplain that was a priest. Alabama was a state chaplain that was a priest. Arkansas, of course, Louisiana you'd expect it because they had 3-4 priests there. But the priests actually rose to the highest levels in it, surprisingly, despite things that were going on.
Wow.
So it was good going in there. So that was part of my duty. I also had to take care of the general officers in all the states in the National Guard, because once you're a general, you're in the club kind of thing.
To get a star, do you have to? Is that a congressional approval?
Congressional approval.
Wow.
But you also have to go through promotions all the way through. You had to be decent, but you also had to have certain types of schooling. That's why I spent a year at Harvard. They had Army War College there, as they call it, but it should be called How Not to Go to War, How to Use Your Other Tools to Make That Work. And it was good. Yeah.
That's what's up.
So I did all those kinds of things, all while still being a pastor of parishes here, except for the 5 years that I was there, or times that I'd be activated and sent to Iraq or sent to Korea or sent to Ecuador and a few other places and stuff. So it was good.
So you are a priest, a chemist, a U.S. Army general, and a fantasy author.
That's correct.
That is incredible.
No, actually, it fits together pretty well.
No,
it's
Army of God.
I'll tell you what. I think it speaks to something that I've been told, and that I think as I come to know the Lord more, is really becoming more and more the focus of my life, which is that Jesus makes each of us more of ourselves. Our sin makes us less of ourselves.
Correct.
But, when we live our lives in Christ, we become more of who He really made us to be, and that the gospel is not, and the person of Christ is not exhausted in any one particular, way of living or any one particular person.
Correct.
Because He is infinite, and so that's why just the diversity of the saints. Every story is different, and so that.
Unfortunately, they get along in heaven despite that diversity, which is nice.
So I think that's really awesome. Is there anywhere or first of all, anything aside from your books that you'd like us to plug? We will definitely be sure to put links to these in our in the description. But is there anything else that you'd like to plug?
Well, I'm working on and almost finished with a book on poems. They're for one poem per month for the dull times of the month, not the exciting things, and prayers that go with them, so that you can kind of pick them up again and again and kind of be encouraged with it and stuff. So and they're all kind of religious-based poetry, but they're all in meter and rhyme. Some of them are really good. You need a handkerchief to get through most of it and stuff because they're intense.
They sound like psalms.
Yes, and you will feel yourself moved by them in good ways, no matter who you are. So the books, I've got a website, tracesofmagic, all one word.com, and it can take you to buy them or buy the audiobooks if you like that, or buy the Kindle version, which is like a couple bucks, or if you've got Kindle Unlimited, they're free. So you can take them with you and read them on the thing and stuff like that. So I'm not finished with the book on poems. My part is I'm waiting to illustrate it. because they need something underneath each poem to kind of make it come alive a little bit.
So did you do these as well, these illustrations?
I did, yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Well, I was intending to just give some hints, and a classmate of mine who used to be a priest and left does kind of publishing stuff, and he just took them and ran with them. So I did the cover work, and he was able to put on the
binding.
The binding and stuff like that. So
Cool.
But I did all those. So healing down to the roots is one of the terms that we've got in canon law, by the way. It's called sanatio, healing, in radice, root. Healing down to the root is what we do when you've got someone who has been married out of the church and they get everything put together and they get it healed all the way back to their original wedding vows. That's called a sanatio in radice. So I picked up that title from there, and all the different things that are with it and stuff. So I'm hoping that that'll work well. I've published a number of articles, Colors of Spirituality, that help parents understand teenagers and vice versa. I could do a podcast on one of those because that would be very, very useful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it also help people understand spouses and things, because you've got an intellectual perspective on things, you've got an emotional perspective, and then you've got an instinctive area, which is where magic starts from, but also the colors. We've got 7 of them that we all have, all 7, but each of us in different proportions. And that works for a number of good things. Written on liturgy, history of the Reformation, and other kinds of things. And I've been working for the last 60 years on trying to reconcile science and faith. And I think I've got a little bit of a handle on it. Science describes the outside of God because it moves toward that from what you see that he's done. Faith can describe the inside of God from what he's revealed, and they come together. But modern media tends to proclaim that they're actually opposite.
The humanist approach.
Yeah, because they're assuming that they don't work. Whereas the more science you know, the more
it reveals the character of God.
You see the fingerprints of God at work in things, and they're beautiful in that. I also work at the marriage tribunal and stuff, but we can't do a podcast on that because it's all secret. Well, it's confidential and about the people's lives and things like that.
Yeah.
But I can tell you how the tribunal works and why it works the way it does sometimes. I can do all kinds of things that you'd like on that. I'd love to come back and visit with you folks again.
I think, Patrick, I think we need to do a part 2.
Yes.
Okay.
What do you say? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
4-part, one for each book.
Well, we can do any of
that.
those. Well, I can leave the books here and let you folks start to read them, or if you'd prefer the audio
science and faith one.
I was gonna say, Father, I'm gonna have to one way or another. I'm gonna read these because I'm reading all sorts of fiction all the time as a pastime. So this sounds something right up my alley. So
and let me know if it doesn't reach you. Then see if I can make it better.
Yeah, I'd love to speak more intelligently myself on these next time around. So
and see the stories that are good. What else can I be of help with you?
I don't know.
Just a blessing.
A blessing would be wonderful.
Okay.
Yes.
May the Lord God watch over and bless you all abundantly, and bless your audience. May he bless people who struggle day by day to kind of put one spiritual foot in front of the other and struggle through and slog through what they're doing in life. May he bless those that kind of dance over the surface and still know that God is calling to them. May he bless those who hear the voice of God or see his fingerprints in all of creation and try and make things better because of the image of God in each of them that wants to come out and work with the skills and the tools and the materials he's given us. And may God give you all his blessing as you move through your life, not only to draw closer to Christ, but to renew the face of the earth through the power of the Holy Spirit. May God give you this and every blessing, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.
Father.
Thank you so much,
My
Father.
pleasure.
And thank all of you for sticking around. Hope to see you on the next episode of Spirit Inspire. Please do not forget to do all of the YouTube things, like, subscribe, share this video with friends and family if you found it helpful. And until next time, God bless you.
God
Thank
bless.
you.